Hey guys, let's talk about the Nick Rekieta case just for a couple of minutes. I wasn't planning on that, but I think there is an angle to cover here at least that maybe in an abbreviated form you've seen some other places. So, in this case, the facts are probably worse than his supporters would like to believe, but not as bad as his worst detractors want to portray. It's not surprising, right? It's not a good situation, but let's keep it in perspective. But a lot of argument being made by Nick's supporters, at least some of them online, is that the search warrant itself was not valid. It's a gross violation of constitutional rights and it should be tossed out. Well, that's a strong opinion, a strong argument, but is it right? Let's look at the law. Now, remember, the application for the warrant was for the discovery of controlled substances. Cocaine and meth were mentioned as examples at the home or on the person of Nick. So that's the scope we're dealing with. Now, the United States and Minnesota constitutions, they both set down the law that no search warrant shall issue except upon probable cause. So how do you find out whether the judge made a mistake or not? Let's look at how an appeals court in Minnesota would look at that. Appeals court will review the warrant and see if the judge had a substantial basis to issue the warrant. Now, if you don't think there was one, well, that's good for Nick's defense. But what does it mean? What do those few words mean, at least as applied by the courts up there? The court looks to see if the issuing judge made a practical, common sense decision, whether, given all the circumstances set forth in the affidavit before him, all, including the veracity and basis of knowledge of persons supplying hearsay information, and that's certainly a point of argument, there's a fair probability that contraband or evidence of a crime will be found in a particular place. And that's kind of the rub there at the end, fair probability. You're not trying the case here, right? So the idea is whether there was a fair probability based on all the circumstances that you'd find contraband in Nick's house or on his person. And that's less good for Nick's defense as to the search warrant. It doesn't sound quite as awesome as substantial basis. And the appeals court gives great deference to the judge's decision to issue the warrant. Now, in testing this, the appeals court applies a totality of the circumstances test to determine whether probable cause exists. And the appeals court must be careful not to second guess the judge by reviewing each component of the affidavit in isolation. So you can't pick out one thing and say, well, that's not good enough. This isn't good enough. You have to look at the whole picture. Finally, the courts say resolution of doubtful or marginal cases should be largely determined by the preference to be accorded to warrants. In other words, if it's a closed case, they're going to let the warrant stand because they're going to say the judge was the closest to the situation and let that judge make the decision. So there are two problems with pinning the key to defense on invalidating the search warrant. As you can see, it's an uphill battle at the appeals level, given the fairly low standard for issuing a warrant. You're not trying a case here. You're just deciding a fair probability, and even that is not on trial evidence standards. And the deference given to the judge issuing the warrant. Those are two big problems with trying to invalidate a warrant. Not that it's impossible, of course. It's fair enough to argue, hey, what this person was alleged to have said in the probable cause affidavit does not prove that there were drugs, or this single observation does not prove that there were drugs. Okay, that's fair. The weaknesses, though, in that argument is that you have to address all the parts in totality. So one piece of evidence might be insufficient or not even relevant, but the standard is to look at all of it. So if you look at the things in a cumulative fashion, does that equal a fair probability? That's the test. And you may still say no, and that's fine, but that's the test you've got to deal with. So, for example, if you see people like this on the street standing slumped over and just hanging around like that, not comprehending what's going on around them, that may not by itself prove they're on drugs, but it would definitely be a relevant part of deciding there's a fair probability of drug use going on. How does that relate to the Rekieta case? Law enforcement tied a variety of statements with observations made themselves based on watching Nick's own streams. And it's no giant leap to have watched Nick's last stream before this happened and think, man, he's on some bad stuff. And that's without any special training to recognize drug use. It's true, of course, that the fact they found drugs on site, that's not relevant to whether the search warrant was valid or is valid. You look at the facts presented to the judge, not facts found later and not facts that could have been presented but weren't, just what was presented. And so if you're wondering about the warrant, look only at what was presented to the judge and then consider that in totality without isolating the elements. Does the total picture of what was presented, not more, not less, support the finding of a fair probability of finding controlled substances at the home or on the person? If yes, the warrant was valid, and if no, then not. It's ultimately not more complicated than that, and that's what the constitutions and the law require. It's pretty obvious to me that what Nick got involved with did not have the grip on him a while back that it does now. And I'm not saying Nick is my friend, like other lawyers say, because we don't know each other. But like a lot of people, I enjoyed his trial streams, and that his platform helped other lawyers get their voices heard too. My take is really along the lines of Joe on Good Logic. Nick needs a practical resolution to his case for his own good and those around him, a solution that gets him away from the things that are dragging him down. As probably a lot of you know, when a person is involved in substance abuse, they lose the perspective on how that affects the people around them. And people they love and who they would never hurt can be hurt because the person just does not see the effect of the problem. So I personally wish Nick and his family the best. But as for the legal elements, let's just keep it real and not spin it based on being pro or anti whoever is the subject. So have whatever opinion you want on the search warrant. Just try and keep it grounded in the actual law that will be applied there. Well, that's it. Thanks. Bye.